It has lived elsewhere before it entered this world, it will live elsewhere when it passes hence, human life being but a parenthesis in the midst of eternity. But upon entering this world, the soul must needs assume material form. In other words, it takes upon itself the physical body to enable it to enter into relations with the physical world, and to perform the functions appropriate to it in this particular phase of its career. Need I say that the physical form with which we have all been invested by the Creator upon our entrance into this world, and of which we shall all divest ourselves when we leave the lodge of this life, is represented among us by our Masonic apron? This, our body of mortality, this veil of flesh and blood clothing the inner soul of us, this is the real badge of innocence, the common bond of friendship, with which the great architect has been pleased to invest us all. This, the human body, is the badge which is older and nobler than that of any other order in existence, and though it be but a body of humiliation compared with that body of incorruption which is the promised inheritance of him who endures to the end, let us never forget that if we never do anything to disgrace the badge of flesh with which God has endowed each of us, that badge will never disgrace us. Brethren, I charge you to regard your apron as one of the most precious and speaking symbols our order has to give you. Remember that when you first wore it was a piece of pure white lambskin, an emblem of that purity and innocence which we always associate with the lamb and with the newborn child. Remember that you first wore it with the flap raised, it being thus a five-cornered badge, indicating the five senses, by means of which we enter into relations with the material world around us, our 5 points of fellowship with the material world, but indicating also by the triangular portion above, in conjunction with the quadrangular portion below, that man's nature is a combination of soul and body, the three-sided emblem at the top added to the four-sided emblem beneath making 7, the perfect number, 4, as it is written in an ancient Hebrew doctrine with which Masonry is closely allied. God blessed and loved the number 7 more than all things under his throne, by which is meant that man, the sevenfold being, is of the most cherished of all the Creator's works. And hence also it is that the lodge has 7 principal officers, and that a lodge, to be perfect, requires the presence of 7 brethren, though the deeper meaning of this phrase is that the individual man, in virtue of his sevenfold constitution, in himself constitutes the perfect lodge, if he will but know himself and analyze his own nature aright. To each of us also from our birth have been given 3 lesser lights, by which the lodge within ourselves may be illumined. For the sun symbolizes our spiritual consciousness, the higher aspirations and emotions of the soul, the moon betokens our reasoning or intellectual faculties, which, as the moon reflects the light of the sun, should reflect the light coming from the higher spiritual faculty and transmit it into our daily conduct, whilst the master of the lodge is a symbolical phrase denoting the willpower of man, which should enable him to be master of his own life, to control his own actions and keep down the impulses of his lower nature, even as the stroke of the master's gavel controls the lodge and calls to order and obedience the brethren under his direction. By the assistance of these lesser lights within us, a man is enabled to perceive what is, again symbolically, called the form of the lodge, that is, the way in which his own human nature has been composed and constituted, the length, breadth, height and depth of his own being. By their help, too, he will perceive that he himself, his body and his soul, are holy ground, upon which he should build the altar of his own spiritual life, an altar deeper which he should suffer no iron tool, no debasing habit of thought or conduct, to defile. By them, of two, he will perceive how wisdom, strength and beauty have been employed by the Creator, like 3 grand supporting pillars, in the structure of his own organism. And by these finally he will discern how that there is a mystical ladder of many rounds or staves, that is, that there are innumerable paths or methods by means of which men are led upwards to the spiritual light encircling us all, and in which we live and move and have our being, but that of the 3 principal methods, the greatest of these, the one that comprehends them all and brings us nearest heaven, is love, in the full exercise of which godlike virtue Mason reaches the summit of his profession, that summit being God himself, whose name is love. I cannot too strongly impress upon you, brethren, the fact that, Throughout our rituals and our lectures, the reference is made to the lodge and not to the building in which we meet. That building itself is intended to be but a symbol, a veil of allegory concealing something else. Know ye not, says the great initiate St. Paul, that ye are the temples of the Most High, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? The real lodge referred to throughout our rituals is our own individual personalities, and if we interpret our doctrine in the light of this fact, we shall find that it reveals an entirely new aspect of the purpose of our craft. It is after investment with the apron that the initiate is placed in the ani corner. Thereby he is intended to learn that at his birth into this world the foundation stone of his spiritual life was duly and truly laid and implanted within himself, and he is charged to develop it, to create a superstructure upon it. Two paths are open to him at this stage, a path of light and a path of darkness, a path of good and a path of evil. The ani corner is the symbolical dividing place between the two. In symbolical language, the N always signifies the place of imperfection and undevelopment. In olden times the bodies of suicides, reprobates and unbaptized children were always buried in the north or sunless side of a churchyard. The seat of the junior members of the craft is allotted to the north, for, symbolically, it represents the condition of the spiritually unenlightened man, the novice in whom the spiritual light latent within him has not yet risen above the horizon of consciousness and dispersed the clouds of material interests and the impulses of the lower and merely sensual life. The initiate placed in the ani corner is intended to see, then, that on the one side of him is the path that leads to the perpetual light of the East, into which he is encouraged to proceed, and that on the other is that of spiritual obscurity and ignorance into which it is possible for him to remain or relapse. It is a parable of the dual paths of life open to each one of us, on the one hand the path of selfishness, material desires and sensual indulgence, of intellectual blindness and moral stagnation, on the other the path of moral and spiritual progress, in pursuing which one may decorate and adorn the lodge within him with the ornaments or jewels of grace and with the invaluable furniture of true knowledge, and which he may dedicate, in all his actions, to the service of God and of his fellow men. And mark that of those jewels some are said to be movable and transferable, because when displayed in our own lives and natures their influence becomes transferred and communicated to others and helps to uplift and sweeten the lives of our fellows, whilst some are immovable because they are permanently fixed and planted in the roots of our own being, and are indeed the raw material which has been entrusted to us to work out of chaos and roughness into due and true form. The ceremony of our first degree, then, is a swift and comprehensive portrayal of the entrance of all man into, first, physical life, and second, into spiritual life, and as we extend congratulations when a child is born into the world, so also we receive with acclamation the candidate for Masonry who, symbolically, is seeking for spiritual rebirth, and herein we emulate what is written of the joy that exists among the angels of heaven over every sinner who repents and turns towards the light. The first degree is also eminently the degree of preparation, of self-discipline and purification. It corresponds with that symbolical cleansing accorded in the sacrament of baptism, which, in the churches, is, so to speak, the first degree in the religious life, and which is administered, appropriately, at the font, near the entrance of the church, even as the act itself takes place at the entrance of the spiritual career. For to all of us such initial cleansing and purifying is necessary. As has been beautifully written by a fellow worker in the craft: "'Tis scarcely true that souls come naked down to take abode up in this earthly town, or naked pass, of all they were denied. We enter slipshod and with clothes awry, and we take with us much that by and by may prove no easy task to put aside. Cleanse, therefore, that which round about us clings, we pray thee, Master, ere thy sacred halls we enter. Strip us of redundant things, and meetly clothe us in pontificals." In the schools of the mysteries, when aspirants for the higher life were wont to quit the outer world and enter temples or sanctuaries of initiation, prolonged periods were allotted to the practical achievement of what is briefly summarized in our first degree. We are told 7 or more years was the normal period, though less sufficed in worthy cases. The most severe tests of discipline, of purity, of self-balance were required before a neophyte was permitted to pass forward, and a reminiscence of these tests of fitness is preserved in our own working by the conducting of the candidate to the two wardens, and submitting him to a merely formal trial of efficiency. For it is impossible today, as it was impossible in ancient times, for a man to reach the heights of moral perfection and spiritual consciousness which were then, and are now, the goal and aim of all the schools of the mysteries and all the secret orders, without purification and trial. Complete stillness of body, utter purity of strange houses of sleep by A.E. Waite. Mind, are absolute essentials to the attainment of things of great and final moment. Who says Psalmist, and remember that the Psalms were the sacred hymns used in the Hebrew mysteries, who will go up to the hill of the Lord, and descend to his holy place. Even he that hath clean hands and a pure heart, whence it comes that we wear white gloves and aprons as emblems that we have purified our hearts and washed our hands in innocency. So also our patron saint, St. John, teaches, he who hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he, that is, the Master whom he is seeking, is pure. For he who is not pure in body and mind, he who is enslaved by passions and desires, or by bondage to the material interests of this world, is, by the very fact of his uncleanness, prevented from passing on. Nothing unclean or that defileth a man, we are told, can enter into the kingdom, and, therefore, our candidates are told that if they have money or medals about them, if, that is, they are subject to any physical attraction or mental defilement, their real initiation into the higher things, of which our ceremony is but a dramatic symbol, must be deferred and repeated again and again until they are cleansed and fitted to pass on. After purification come contemplation and enlightenment, which are the special subjects of the second degree. Aforetime the candidate for the mysteries, after protracted discipline and purification enabling his mind to acquire complete control over his passions and his lower physical nature, was advanced, as he may advance himself today, to the study of his more interior faculties, to understand the science of the human soul, and to trace these faculties in their development from their elementary stage until he realizes that they connect with, and terminate in, the divine itself. The secrets of his mental nature and the principles of intellectual life became at this stage gradually unfolded to his view. You will thus perceive, brethren, that the FC degree, sometimes regarded by us as a somewhat uninteresting one, typifies in reality a long course of personal development requiring the most profound knowledge of the mental and psychical side of our nature. It involves not merely cleansing and control of the mind, but a full comprehension of our inner constitution, of the more hidden mysteries of our nature and of spiritual psychology. In this degree it is that our attention is called to the fact that the Mason who has attained proficiency in this grade has been enabled to discover a sacred symbol, placed in the center of the building, and alluding to the GGOTU doubtless we have often asked ourselves what that phase and what that symbol imply. Need I repeat that the building alluded to is not the edifice we meet in, but is our own selves, and that the sacred symbol at the center of the roof and of the floor of this outward temple is but symbolic of that which exists at the center of ourselves, and which was spoken of by the Christian Master when he proclaimed that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that at the depths of our own being, concealed beneath the heavy veils of the sensual, lower nature, there resides that vital and immortal principle, which is said to allude to the GG because it is nothing other than a spark of God himself immanent within us. Over the old temples of the mysteries was deeper written the injunction man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and God. Happy then is the Mason who has so far purified and developed his own nature as to realize in its fullness the meaning of the sacred symbol of the second degree, and found God present not outside but within himself. But in order to find the perfect points of entrance to this secret, and we are told elsewhere that strait is the way and narrow the gate, and few there be that find it, emphasis again is laid in our teaching upon the necessity of complete moral rectitude, of utter exactness of thought, word and action, as exemplified by rigid observance of the symbolic principles of the square, level and plumb rule. Here again the symbolism of our work becomes extremely profound and interesting. He who desires to rise to the heights